Hey folks, welcome to the Unsung Podcast. I'm
Hey Mark, welcome to the Unsung Podcast.
Hey Chris, welcome to the Unsung Podcast.
Try to think it's like Groundhog Day. What have we not done before? That guy over there is going to drop a dish. That's Mary. She was born here. She married Jack. He ran a hardware store. Welcome to the Unsung Podcast. This week we are going to talk at length about a subject for which we have neither the qualifications nor the self-discipline to undertake proper research.
Yes, that's very true. And we're covering a band who've got a very fervent fan base who I'm sure are going to point out every single fucking mistake that we make.
You know, it's some at that point at Groundhog Day where he gives up and gets just totally nihilistic and just starts doing mad shit.
Yeah, well, what can you do?
How about we talk about bands who live up to their name this week?
Yeah, who's that then, Chris?
That would be the Wildhearts.
The Wildhearts. Okay, so this week we're going to talk about the Wildhearts, and you have chosen an album.
Controversially, at least in the minds of the band members and especially Ginger, I've chosen Fishing for Luckies,
which isn't really even an album.
Well, it is.
No, he says otherwise.
He says otherwise, but who's he? What authority does he have to decide what's Wildhearts canon? I do want to specify as well, disambiguate. I've chosen the 1996 edition of Fishing for Luckies.
The 1996 one, not the one that they released after the label released it. It's hard to track
the first one was the one they released on the fan thing.
Yes.
Then there was Fishing for More Luckies, which I think the label released. And then there's Fishing for Luckies 1996 with different tracks on it. I mean, we do have clues to this in our notes. They're copious notes, Mark.
Copious notes.
Copious notes. Yeah, I do want to say though, in initial research for this show, I'm struck that at least every second podcaster discussing either the Wildhearts or Ginger is Scottish. I just couldn't get away from Scottish accents, and we're only compounding the problem.
Tell me some of the sources that you came across.
I used a website called YouTube.
Oh wow,
quite heavily.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Is that a new website? Is that up and coming?
It is. It's good for kids. Yeah, so I used YouTube, and there's a lot of fan channels that seem to be Scottish. Now the Wildhearts are from the northeast. I mean, mainly Newcastle is what they're associated with. It's where they formed. Maybe the proximity to Scotland has led to some sort of like disproportionate sort of representation here. I'm not really sure of that, but yeah, there's a large amount, a number of them in Glasgow in particular.
Oh, anybody you know? No. Maybe
we shall after this.
Yes.
Maybe they'll be correcting us in the comments.
I hope so. Somebody needs to comment.
Somebody does, yeah. But aye, so we're going to do the Wildhearts Fishing for Luckies. I thought you would have listened to this band before.
I had listened to them, when I was coming up, as they say in America, but they never stuck for me. I think it's probably because they are very pub rock, and it wasn't what I was kind of listening to at the time.
But I know what you mean by that. But
they are pub rock now. I don't think when they were coming up they were.
I know what you mean by that. I think that's the unkind reading of it, but I know what you mean.
I don't think
it's that kind of like power chordy, melodic, bloke singing kind of rock that doesn't have any particular nuance to it, except they do have a lot more going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not using pub rock in a pejorative sense there.
I know, but it's unavoidable.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's a lot of great pub rock bands. AC/DC.
Who they toured with.
Yeah, I know. So it's not
the pub rock tour.
But no, so I would have first come across them when 2003. So what album was that? Wildhearts Must Be Destroyed. Roughly around about that time. Vanilla Radio, I remember seeing in Crank TV, basically.
Yeah.
And I always thought, that song's alright. And then I think I acquired the record. or parts of the record. I mean, my internet connection wasn't fast enough to acquire the whole record. I acquired parts of the record back at that time, and it just kind of washed off me a little bit. Mm-hmm. I might be making this up now, but I think there was a good review for it in Krang, which kind of helped seal the deal for me that I should check them out. There may not have been a good review.
They were very popular in Krang. Not just the Wildhearts, but a number of offshoots and just as personalities. I mean, we spoke a bit about it last week, that there's something enjoyable from a distance when it comes to the hedonism of certain bands, that it colours up the whole kind of art form.
Absolutely. As
long as you don't have to be the one mopping up the rooms or
dealing with the detritus.
There was a fair amount of anecdotes on the last episode. There's going to be a fair few more on this one.
But yeah, so I just didn't really click with me at the time, so never really came back to them. No, actually, I did try to listen to FHUQ, which PHUQ, which I think obviously is supposed to be fuck, right? Mm-hmm. But Ginger himself pronounces it PHUQ, which I think is kind of cute in a way.
I don't know if he was doing that in certain podcasts to avoid them being
possibly. But I think that that record felt more together than the Wildhearts Must Be Destroyed when I heard it. But again, I wasn't receptive to it at the time.
It's mental to me to speak to people who get into the Wildhearts even remotely after the 90s. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that to be unkind to them. I'm just like, they were such a hot fucking thing then that even getting into them later, I would have still assumed you would get into them later via their earlier stuff, because I had completely lost track of their albums pretty much after Endless Nameless. I lost track of what they were putting out, full stop.
Well, they were a band as well that had a lot of hiatuses and different versions of lineups.
Is it plural for hiatuses? Hiatuses? A bit like octopuses, or is it hiati?
Hiati.
The island of Haiti.
Yeah, but I think that probably makes it difficult to track the chronology of the band if you're not a huge fan, because they are there and then they're not there for a long period of time, and it turns out that they were inactive for 2 really long periods of time.
Yeah, it was a decade at one point.
Yeah, and I'm kind of the opposite. I always remember them kind of being there, even though I was never a fan. So Wildhearts were always kicking about, right? Evidently not.
There was a long period where Ginger was kicking about in various other incarnations.
And subconsciously, that's probably what I've picked up, you know.
So first of all, very gracious of you to let us get this far without pointing out to the listeners that I'm wearing double denim.
I mean, I wasn't going to do it, man. You specifically told me not to do it earlier on.
It's weighing on my conscience though, right? Apparently last week I was dressed a bit too dark.
No one can see your legs, Chris.
I was like, I'm going to do the newsreader thing of just like changing the top half. So yeah, I'm wearing double denim, Texan tuxedo.
And it's denim boxers, by the way. It's not denim jeans.
A button fly. Brilliant. Anyway, as regards Wildhearts, initial thoughts. I nominated this. Am I a huge Wildhearts fan? No.
See, that's always whenever we do this, man, it's always like, oh fuck. we're about to step into territory which you said at the very start of the episode we are completely unqualified to comment on.
But I have a massive place in my heart for this particular record. I also thought it was especially justified given that the band so thoroughly disavow this album that I'm like, no, wait a minute. Like I have a really this played a big part in my musical youth. I would actually wager that it had a fairly significant impact on my own writing as well. We'll unpack that a bit later. Not only for the better but for the worse if you ask some of my bandmates, because some of these songs are complicated and sprawling and change directions and throw every idea possible into the mix.
Yeah, you either like that or you don't like that, right?
Yeah, and if you try to learn it, especially if you're a drummer, you're like, wait, what? What number is that? So also just to place it a bit, I think this might make sense to you. I was listening to this around about the time I was listening to The Grey Race by Bad Religion a lot, which we've done on the show before. And
controversial choice.
Yeah, it was. And I actually think that makes a lot of sense musically, because that, to me, the Bad Religion album, Grey Race, and that kind of period, it's still technically punk, but it's also power pop almost. Multi-layered vocals, really thick slabs and washes of guitar, lots and lots and lots of melody. Like, it might be aggressive, but it's dense with layers and layers of melody, sheets of melody. We spoke about it a bit, and our confusion maybe illustrates this. I was unaware of the various iterations of this album when I got it. And actually, thinking back in it, I do remember being really unsure about it, but like, wait a minute, is that the cover? I'm sure I heard such and such song in this album. Where is it? And there was a lot of that back in the day, and now that makes sense. Knowing that it went through this iterative process again, like fan release, label re-release, definitive re-release with new stuff recorded. And that's why I wanted to really specify that it was like the 96 copy that I kind of fell in love with.
Yeah. That's really a feature of the band, not a bug. These vast, sprawling like re-releases and chucking in all these songs, and that just seems to be the modus operandi for a lot of the. And
as you said, they have a very loyal fan base. We'll talk about why that is. I would just get this out the road straight up. They spent a lot of time touring. They did it the hard way. They were in vans, they were on support slots, they were up and down the country, back, forward, left, right, everything you could do. And as Ginger himself has said, the fans they made were fans for life. They were meeting these people, they were meeting them multiple times, year after year after year. Oh, there's so-and-so, there's so-and-so, hiya mate, how you doing? And so these were people that grew up with the band, and it was close and it was personal to them. And it's a phenomenon that we'll talk about later. It doesn't necessarily exist the same way anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's still. I don't want to go down this road too much, but that's still very much. It's now not the only way you can do it. There are other ways you can build communities, but that's still one of the most valuable ways. It's one of the most real and authentic and engaging ways. It's just harder. It's a lot harder to do now. Yeah.
That's viable in the sense of to make long-lasting life connections, maybe not to make money. Yeah. Now, in terms of like initial references and comparisons sonically, it's a big task given the diversity of what does go on here. Because yes, there is an overarching pub rock air. I get what you're saying there, but
do you want me to chuck out who I think it is, and you can tell me if you agree with them?
Okay, go for it.
Cheap Trick.
There's a fair bit of that, yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
The power pop. Ramones, particularly in the way that the Ramones used to always incorporate like doo-wop harmonies and stuff like that, in certain parts of their career. There was obviously AC/DC in there. I think later on they do get more Motorheady as well. They love the riff, they love the speed as well.
They love Motorheads.
I mean, I've seen reviews compare that to Metallica, but I think it's more primal than that, more primordial.
A very common refrain is the Beatles mixed with Metallica.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bit of an eye roll.
It is Motorhead though. It is, because they don't have the pure metal of Metallica. Neil did Metallica for a long period of time, have pure metal either. And I think that's where their riff comes from. Motorhead weren't super riffy, but there is definitely an American new wave of heavy metal-ish sort of vibe there too. Your maybe like your Judas Priest and your Maiden and stuff like that, just for the way that they construct riffs and bring them out, and the kind of slightly metallic quality of some of the heavier stuff they do as well.
To complement that, I mean, I would, breaking down the aspects of the band, I would say, you've mentioned buoyant hooks, I would say, in the form of Ramones. I think there's a lot of Beach Boys as well. I think there's a lot of classic 70s rock like Kiss, and Ginger's on record has been a big fan. Plenty of Sex Pistols and stuff like Sham 69. One of the things about Wildhearts is they have a very thick, almost grungy American rock sound, but they managed to kind of still like plant it in England specifically, and I think it's because of the incorporation of a lot of like classic punk. That grungy element, you can see it in a lot of Nirvana stuff. I think it was the Nirvana fan in me that was initially drawn to them. I can hear layered power pop, stuff like Weezer, and even some of the later Everclear stuff that with the 40 layers of guitar that they would put on records. I think you can hear, especially in the length of some of the songs and the twists and turns they take, some of that kind of proggy grunge of Smashing Pumpkins. I know we've said clearly in the past Smashing Pumpkins were not part of the grunge movement, but they were sort of contemporaries of them, and I think they had a grunginess to them, but it was just so much more prone to flights of fancy in terms of the songs and the structure and where they went. As you said, I think there's chunks of classic metal. I think there's like Iron Maiden, definitely, bits of Metallica. I think there's bits of Slayer, like in terms of almost tongue-in-cheek moments where they go into something that's just incredibly metallic, and you're just like, fucking hell, they're doing that almost for a lull. And there's a fair amount of industrial rock in them as well. I mean,
there's a lot of they incorporate industrial rock in the way that I think Axl Rose tried to incorporate industrial rock in some of the Chinese Democracy stuff, which would have been from the 90s, or like Oh My God, which
is almost like a really light Rammstein type industrial rock. You're not talking like pure Einstürzenden kind of clanking weird stuff. Talking like, like, especially when they start messing about the drum sounds and things like that.
Guns N' Roses should also be mentioned as an influence.
Yes, again, there's a reason for that as well, a crossing of paths. And Ginger's actually said that Wildhearts were really heavily inspired by the band The Cardiacs. Mm-hmm. Kind of British, what would you call them, like prog punk? I think they were effectively like a prog band that were really inspired by the punk movement and sort of blended it. I think he's pointed out that people like Mike Patton drew a lot of influence from Cardiacs as well, which is how him and Wildheart have ended up at this really odd junction of rock music where it's got all these different things going on.
Was it not their bass player John Poole was in the
he was, and they've done stuff with, I think, is it Carol, the girl for the Cardiacs? I can't remember. Apologies if I got the name wrong there. I think she's been involved with Wildhearts recordings as well. But it's a band with a long history. First of all, started in 1989 and a big musical footprint, not just in the UK, and we can look at some of their many offshoots as we go on. Some of the basics, they were formed in 1989 in Newcastle upon Tyne. The definitive lineup, which is something that will get picked apart as we move on here, is Ginger, CJ Wildheart, Danny and Rich. They have rotated through multiple members, sometimes a couple of times. The only permanent member is Ginger. There is some friction, there always has been to some extent, highs and lows of relationships. Ginger does sometimes take issue with the notion of a classic lineup, as he says that listeners would be amazed how much of what they're hearing is just him. A lot of points. He makes a sort of similar comment later as well regarding people refusing to learn tunes from albums they didn't play on. So when the band did get back together or people came back and rejoined, he would have a hard time saying to them, could you learn such and such off of these other records? And they wouldn't really fancy it because they were like, I wasn't on that one.
That's a fair attitude to have, I think.
Well, yeah.
I can also see how it's justified, I suppose, but
it kind of depends on the yes, on the face of it, that does seem a bit shite, but you should know what you're getting into. But also, I don't know what the politics was around those albums. Maybe they feel perfectly entitled to being a bit unhappy with how they were, not involved in them. I'm not sure. Well, I'm sure, but I don't want to just broad strokes it at this point. Notably, CJ, for example, in one of his interviews says that he and Ginger fell out and then fell back in and fell out and currently aren't really on good speaking terms. And it's maybe because of some of the comments of Ginger like that, things about like you'd be amazed how little they did in some of these albums, stuff like that.
I did see a comment about their last record, the 21st Century Love Songs.
That's the previous
the last record.
It's not the newest record.
The new, and they basically... Was it Danny had said in his autobiography that at that point Ginger had just fired everybody because of monetary reasons. So there's obviously a lot of shit slinging in biographies and all that from various members of the band.
The biography was delayed because of a threat of legal action by an unnamed member of the band. Yeah, I mean, the Wildhearts name has increasingly become synonymous just with Ginger himself. But to discuss the other definitive lineup members a wee bit first, you've just mentioned Danny McCormack, probably the most apparently a victim of his own personal habits. If you see Danny McCormack now, he's also a guy who, we'll talk about this a bit more as we go on, spent a bit of time in a mental ward Ginger's spoken about that as well. Ginger published an open letter in Kerrang in 2003 addressing Danny's habits, problems, addictions, and wishing him well. Danny McCormick suffered an aneurysm in 2015, nearly died, ended up losing one of his legs as a result. As of an interview that he did in 2021, he claimed to have been clean for 6 years. He's been diagnosed as bipolar and he's been medicated for it, and he says that seems to have helped him a lot. He was booted out of the Wildhearts again in 2022 though, after a kind of brief reunion. Self-published biography that you were referring to, it's co-written with a guy called Guy Shankland. It's called I, Danny McCormack, Once a Wildheart, Always a Wildheart. That was 2023 that came out. I think even the name of that biography seems to have one eye on legal disputes, to be honest. And yeah, as I say, that was delayed due to a threat of legal action by somebody else. Don't know who that was. Other projects that he's been involved in, he was in the Yo-Yos. He formed them after Wildhearts. They came out in Sub Pop. He was briefly in a band called Dogs That More, who were quite famous back in the day. He started a band called The Main Grains. He was in them in 2015 when he had that aneurysm. He also, his younger brother is Chris McCormack, who was one of the founders of Three Colours Red, big Brit rock band.
He played with them for a bit and was kicked out of the band, wasn't he?
Yeah. CJ Wildheart, another long-term member. Christopher Paul Perso Jagdar. Christopher Paul, there you go, another one. I think Malaysian. I think one side of his family. By the way, he has his own hot sauce brand called Devil Spit.
I love him. I love him already.
Plug.
Yeah. By the way, if you want to sponsor this show, get in touch.
I totally Devil Spit sponsor. I mean, there's worse things.
Yeah, there's definitely worse things. I love hot sauce.
Sony actually bought him out of his contract with Warner so that he could do his own stuff with other bands. His favourite album by Wildhearts is Earth Verses. We'll talk about that later on. He's described that as a bunch of demos tarted up, but that he agrees that whoever made the call to release those demos made the right call. He did say of that recording, by the way, we'll go into that in a bit more detail, because everybody was just thought it was demos, they were just fucking around, and as a result there's a really nice energy in that record. He claims the Wildhearts is a band that he started, not a band that he joined. Yeah, what else? He said he played on Fuck and on Fishing for Luckies. He was out of the band by the time Fuck was being toured, but he says he's on it. And yeah, and apparently that was due to personal differences between him and Ginger. Other projects CJ's done, he did a band called Honeycrack, who brought out an album called Prosaic. One jump in the pan to the fire and a new sensation, new salvation. Too bad you were thinking of yourself again, you should have wised up, keep your big mouth shut. Rise to the surface, take a belly full of air. It's a long way down, but you know I'll meet you there. That was really quite successful. They ended up doing, I don't know if it was European or world tours with Alanis Morissette, Weezer, Skunk Anansie. He was also in a band called The Jellies. And I think more recently he's done a thing called CJ and the Satellites. The definitive era drummer, a guy called Rich Battersby. I don't know if it's a bit much to call him the stable one in the band. I don't know if this is a band that had stable people, but certainly seems to be more of a frequent and reliable collaborator in the writing. And for Ginger, you hear about a lot of the records, he's like, oh yeah, me and Rich are the ones that just sort of dragged this to completion. Yeah, that said, he quickly shut down any notion of involvement in the most recent Wildhearts album. I'm pretty sure, actually, in an interview about that, I heard Ginger mumbling something, kind of tailing off at the end of a line about Rich maybe retiring. That's unconfirmed, but I think that's what he said. Other projects of Rich Battersby include a band called Grand Theft Audio. That was alongside one of the guys from EMF. and he also, I think, more recently had done a band called Sorry Audio. And then I think the last guy of real note to mention as a regular collaborator is John Poole, as you said. Originally a member of the Cardiacs from 1991 onwards. Cardiacs were I think they were formed back in the 70s, but John was in them from 91, and I think that's how he got involved with Wildhearts. He also formed a band called Life Signs. He'd played with a load of bands, including a band called Ad Nauseum, who I think were the reason he first got brought to the attention of Cardiacs, and he also went on to play in a band called Lotus Eaters. But yeah, the main act is Ginger Wildheart. We're going to him in a wee bit of detail. Ginger Wildheart has a YouTube.
He does.
It has the worst ident I've ever heard.
It's pretty bad.
It's fucking caustic. As we do the discography for the band, we're going to refer to there's a 3-part series on that channel where he goes through the Wildhearts records in order of his own preference, including throwing in bits of trivia. It's really quite good. Also, he starts that off with a big slug of coffee from a giant mug that just says cunt.
Tea.
Is it tea?
Yeah.
Tea. There you go. And again, given that I got into this band in 1996, now it wasn't really an era where I overly engaged with a lot of the kind of rock bands I was getting into. It was too much that I was trying to work through. I was a big fan of Kurt Cobain, but I didn't really take on board a lot about the others. My first impressions of Ginger now, having digested a fair bit of his content, I mean, I kind of think he comes across really well overall.
Yeah.
And I think, frankly, I get to say that because I don't know him. With the benefit of distance, to me, I think he's engaging. He has a really sort of relaxed, and maybe it's quite a relatably northern, informal, quite working class manner that I really enjoy. I would say he's down to earth. I don't know if the guy is down to earth, but certainly his manner feels quite down to earth. I mean, I would really like to interview the guy, so I'll choose our words carefully here, bearing in mind that he may well watch this at some point. He's obviously a wee bit cracked, and I don't think even he would dispute that, and I don't mean that unkindly, but he's eccentric. At least.
And you've got to be eccentric to be in a rock band anyway, right?
Yeah.
Or any kind of band, really.
But I think the Wildhearts are pretty far down that spectrum.
Yeah.
He's had a fair bit of conflict, as we say, with other members, and we don't know a fair inside take on any of those issues, any of those disputes. We don't really know the rights and wrongs of what CJ would say, what Danny would say, what Ginger would say. We only know what comes out from one or the other, so it's hard to really try and be objective and balanced about this. Danny, CJ, if you're pissed off because we're making out like he's a lovely guy, I don't know him, but I certainly have no huge reason to dislike him, other than, and I've said this in the show before, I saw them play in Stirling recently, and he was a stroppy cunt at that gig. I think I'm on record as saying that. It was a really unimpressive turnout, but I believe that was to do with a mistake by the promoters regarding ticketing. It certainly wasn't anything to do with the crowd, and I feel like he was pretty out of order in the way he came across that night. So a lot of people had those tickets for a long time and were very excited about that show. Some of us travelled a long way to be at it, and they were kind of shitty on stage. I can completely understand that going into a big venue when it's been missold, yes, that would piss you off, but those guys are long in the tooth. They know better than that. They know to give it their best, I think. So yeah, I wasn't too impressed with that, but I do really like the guy when I see him in interviews. I think it's fair to say he may well be prone to a touch of exaggeration as well as the odd bit of needling in some of what he says. Who isn't? So I suppose the takeaway from that is that he's also human.
Yeah.
What did you make of him with the stuff that you watched of him?
Yeah, he seemed to came across a bit like you said, a down to earth guy. Obviously got stories for days.
Yeah.
And clearly is a storyteller of a sort, because you hear the music, but also you can, just the way that he holds court, I suppose. He's really good at sort of threading all that together and making it into something really engaging and lively. And
he's the first person in the history of this show to make me physically gag. Which happened yesterday.
Yeah, it's a pretty harrowing story, which we might get to in a second, or maybe we won't, and maybe you should go and watch it yourself after you've listened to this, obviously. But no, I think he seems like a pretty decent person, but like the same as you, you've also heard stories otherwise, and I think he's clearly also a business person, right? A businessman as well.
He's driven.
It has to be, but you also must be a businessman, because that's his business. This is his livelihood.
Yeah, it is.
And he seems like he's very switched on. He obviously has been in the business for a while, but he's moved with it as well. And I actually remember the Wildhearts to be one of the very first bands to have really done a Kickstarter style.
That's right. I mean, they were on, I think it was like ITV or STV or something, talking about that at one point.
Yeah.
How they exceeded their Kickstarter requirements, so they actually ended up improving the quality of the album, like going and redoing it because they exceeded their goals.
That was in the nascent days of crowdfunding. It's been a platform and something people could actually utilise to positive ends. And yeah, I think that shows to me that he's savvy. And sometimes if you're a savvy and driven person, you rub people up the wrong way. Not because you're a cunt, just because you want things to be done right and to a certain standard and to a certain in a certain way. Because it is, at the end of the day, like I said, it is your livelihood. I
think Ginger's, certainly Wildhearts as a business, but I suspect it comes largely from Ginger, has a certain outlook on the merchandising and the capitalising on their product, right? So I think, for example, they're a band that were very well known for releasing multiple versions of singles because he knows they have the kind of audience where it's not even like you're taking the piss asking them to buy multiple singles. It seems like that audience get a thrill from being able to buy multiple singles. I mean, certainly when you watch the videos of fans going through their collection of singles, which, by the way, we should note, some of the singles are so brilliantly innovative, the way they're packaged and designed. It's really pretty tremendous. I think it's Sick of Drugs, where the cover has actually got grass in it, and if you plant it or put it in the ground, it grows into the word drugs. I mean, just random shit like that you're like, that's really, really pretty ingenious. And so all the multiple versions of stuff that they released, and I don't just mean the versions of records they didn't like or approve of, but the effort and time that they put in their merchandising with t-shirts and some of the other novel stuff, as you say, the Kickstarter thing, that all shows a sense of like, we're a band, we need to pay for being a band, we've got these people who want to support us, they want stuff, this means a lot to them, so let's give them what they want. There is a pragmatism there that I think's quite just quite sensible, really, if you're trying to be a sustainable band. I think we'll probably deviate into something that you brought up when we were chatting about this a couple of days ago, but the vanishing middle class of music, and how Wildhearts, to me, are one of the last remnants of that.
Yeah.
Perhaps that is because of this attitude.
I would probably say
their ability to maximise what they can get from that loyal audience that remains.
Because they're not huge. They flirted with being a great band in terms of size.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are perplexed why they never jumped up to the level of probably many inferior bands. But I think we clearly know that it's to do with personalities, addiction problems, and inconsistency or unpredictability.
Aye, and labels don't like that.
No, they don't, and they don't like labels. There's probably a bit of back and forth involved there. Yeah. Some Ginger facts. His real name is David Leslie Walls. The fact that CJ now has a release called Kick Down These Walls is probably a total coincidence.
Yeah, must be.
He was brought up in South Shields. It's a seaside town between Newcastle and Sunderland, and he's described it as being pretty violent with not a lot going on apart from fighting. He said that seeing the Sweet on Top of the Pops in 1973 was a bit of a eureka moment. Cause
there's a lot of them in their sound that I think about it.
We just haven't got a clue what to do. Does anyone know the way? There's got to be a way to Blockbuster.
Aye. There was 70s kind of glam, I think.
Definitely. Mick Ronson appears in Fuck, doesn't he? So
yeah, well, we'll talk about another couple in a second. He said one of the big appeals was that his parents hated it. There's a famous anecdote, but during that TV show, the camera zoomed in on a sticker on the guitar, and it was an inverted smiley with the word shit under it, which in 1973 on Top of the Pops is pretty subversive, and he was just like, this is fucking amazing, and that basically became his blueprint for his career. That kind of thing. The first record he said he ever bought with his own money was T-Rex, Ride the White Swan.
Ride it all out like a bird in the sky. Was ride it all out like you were a bird. Fly it all out like an eagle in a sunbeam. Ride it all out like you were a bird.
And he hated it so much he couldn't even listen to it. I think the first band beyond, he said, local bands that he went to see, like Angelic Upstarts were from there, I think, and he saw them locally. But the first big bands that he saw, it was either Slade or Motorhead. I think there's an anecdote that Noddy Holder's fly was down during the show, and some girl got up on stage and started, like, you can imagine, round the back from his guitar. Anyway, it's a hell of a first gig to go to.
Yeah.
But yeah, that Slade gig was also the first time he had a pint at a gig because he was over 18. He said he originally wanted to play drums, and that was kind of partly due to the Sweet and also due to Peter Criss of Kiss. Not many drummers get into drumming because of Peter Criss.
Yeah.
I want to be the fucking cat, and I want to not be good enough so that they get someone else to do the parts when I'm not in the room. But he switched to guitar after seeing Johnny Ramone, and he said he didn't originally want to be a singer. He just did it out of necessity after advertising for singers and not being able to get one.
Been there.
Yeah, well, there you go. Ginger was also in a band called the Choir Boys.
The Choir Boys were quite a big deal.
They were quite a big deal, aye. So this is in London. I think he was in them between 87 and 89. I think they've been going since about 85 though. He'd moved down to London to find musical opportunities, I presume. Apparently he couldn't afford a ticket to go and see them live, but he knew that I think the guy's name's Spike worked in a nightclub, so he went into the nightclub and found Spike and just was like, alright mate, I'm the new guitarist you've been looking for your band. And that just seemed to work because it turned out that recently they'd said, oh, we should get a second guitar. So that's what we ended up doing. They were originally called the Choir Boys, as in like CHOIR. But then people started making fun of them as the Queer Boys. So they changed the name to the Queer Boys for a while. But then they got offered a show on the Reading Festival, but they weren't allowed to play, called the Queer Boys. So they then changed to the Choir, QUIRE Boys.
Why weren't they allowed to play called the Queer Boys?
The Queer Boys, it was too edgy for Reading back in, I don't know, like 87. And they did end up supporting Guns N' Roses in the Choir Boys. Ginger got fired ostensibly for drinking too much and apparently for having too heavy a guitar style. And shortly after he got fired, Sharon Osbourne would become that band's manager. But Spike from the band says that Ginger's story about that is bollocks and that he got fired because he was a Sunderland fan and that Spike was a big Newcastle United fan, and he was like, it's as simple as that. He's like, we're still mates, but I didn't want a Sunderland fan in the band. Who knows? By the way, also on the theme of Unsung stuff, in March 2009, Ginger began writing a column online for Classic Rock magazine. I think the column's called Ginger's Secret History of Rock and Roll, where he basically goes through lesser known albums.
Ginger, you can get in touch with us at unsungpod@gmail.com.
Give Ginger a segment on Unsung. And other projects featuring Ginger, you probably heard the Super Shit 666 with the S and shit characterised by a $sign. It's like dirty, saturated rock, not a million miles away from Wildhearts. It features Dregging and the Backyard Babies and Nick for the Helicopters.
Yes.
You may not have heard of Clam Abuse.
Clam Abuse.
It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek alternative pop thing. He used the stage name Clam Savage in that band. The Prodigy's drummer played with them, by the way, and there's another guy called Alex Kane, and Ginger and Alex Kane formed this after meeting when they were both in rehab. And he made the album, I think because he'd filed for bankruptcy and he just needed to have something to sell, and then he had no idea that the album was going to end up being so popular because it had a fairly prominent cover on it. He had another project, as we probably remember, called the Silver Ginger 5, which only had 4 members, obviously. Didn't actually have a live band until they released their one album. I think they had an album called Black Leather Mojo. He was a member of Brides of Destruction briefly. It was a supergroup that at one point had featured Nikki Sixx. He was in Ginger and the Sonic Circus. He was in a kind of classic rock thing called Hey Hello. He was part of a project called Mutation. It's an industrial rock thing that was with Marquis Smith, The Fall, members of Napalm Death, members of the Cardiacs. members of Sisters of Mercy, Mark.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
There's only one member of Sister of Mercy, really.
Well, maybe it was them.
It wasn't Andrew.
And he was in Ginger Wildheart and The Sinners. He's also written material for and with our man Devin Townsend. We have an episode on Strapping Young Lad, City, if you're interested. And lesser reported, he also performed as Howling Willie Cunt. Have you heard this?
No.
Oh, man. Kind of edgelord satirical country music project. For a long time denied it was him. I think he claimed it was a guy he'd signed to his little imprint label. Man, oh man, there's one album out there, very edgy. Track titles: Say It With Herpes, Your Heart Belongs to Jesus but Your Ass Belongs to Me, Homosexual Punch Bag in a Wheelchair.
Fucking hell.
And track 7 on that album, which, despite the fact that I just said homosexual punch bag in a wheelchair, I can't even say the title of track 7 on the podcast. There's not many things we won't say on this podcast, but I can't say the track title. Mark, I'm going to hand this to you so you can read.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a track title that would make anal cunt blush, okay?
Okay.
Read this.
No way. That's insane.
Definitely not reading that out.
Wow.
Wow, Ginger. Okay, if you want to know what that track title was, number 7 on the album by Howling Willie Cunt. You can go.
I wonder what he thinks of that now.
I mean, I don't, it's obviously incredibly tongue-in-cheek, but it's extremely fucking edgy humour.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyway, moving on. I want to come back to something you mentioned, and we touched on it earlier on. The decline in the middle class of bands. We spoke about this. I think Wildhearts, I mean, I've thrown other examples in there. I think bands like Helmet probably, and bands like Girls Against Boys. I'm sticking mainly to alt-rock stuff here, but even like Everclear, Sebado, to some extent Dinosaur Jr., who I see, by the way, I've just announced another show here. Bands like that were this sort of sustainable middle class. These are the kind of more prominent examples, which arguably still have a little bit of longevity, but an awful lot of them have fallen by the wayside. That area has really, really shrunk. And now you've got this kind of top end versus the vast majority of the iceberg now, which is underwater financially. Watching some interviews with him reminded me of that conversation. I spoke a wee bit about their aptitude for capitalising on their loyal fan base, selling merchandise and maximising the income from tours. Ginger is really outspoken as well on his belief that graft and hard work are what make a good band, and I think that's admirable. Really, really advocates for touring, writing, practicing intensively. I just don't think that really applies now. And I think it is a little bit anachronistic given I was just earlier this week talking about some bands that are out now where they have their socials completely set up and built up and being managed, literally being managed before they have a band or a product.
Yep.
A single song. I tried to book a band to play a show because I'd blah blah so-and-so. I was like, hey, just wondering if I can hear some of the new demos. Oh, we don't have any songs yet, but we have a website, we have a full fucking marketing campaign, we have band shots, we have everything. Oh, we don't have anything written. I was like, well, like a rehearsal recording on your phone? No, we haven't played anything yet. It's just an idea of a band. And that kind of thing it's almost satirical, except it's absolutely not unusual. I would wager it's probably even more common in London. So he comes from a completely different mindset to that. And he does make a good point in some of the interviews that TikTok crowds likely won't stick with bands. One of the things about Wildhearts, as I was saying earlier on, because of the hands-on way, the face-to-face way they toured, they met people, they recognised people, they would go back, same people, or you go and really impress 5 guys on a Tuesday, and the next time they bring 5 more guys, and then they bring 10 more people, and then the audience grows organically like that. I mean, those are fans that then feel very personally attached and invested in your group and your project, and maybe take it with them for the rest of their lives, even if you're not very big. I'm sure you've been in bands where even though we barely managed to fucking move the needle on any sort of wider recognition, people do occasionally get in touch with you, like, this band's still one of my favourite things, I love this album, have it on in the car, and you're like, why? Yeah. But people just form attachments like that, and I think Ginger and Wildhearts have been brilliant at that. Brilliant at really getting under people's skin in that way. And he's right. I do not think TikTok bands might explode. They might have some form of sustainability in the sense that their song goes viral and becomes well known, but do people feel particularly invested in the people in that band or the product? I don't think so.
Well, it's interesting that because there's a few bands, and I think a friend of ours band recently played a show late last year in King Tut's with a band that had got famous off of TikTok. But they were very clever, or not clever, they were very sensible rather, and they parlayed it into, you know what, we've got a little bit of this now, so let's actually go on tour. Turn this fleeting moment, let's turn it into a connection. You know, let's take that to the next level, because you can nurture a community on social media. TikTok is probably not the place to do it. It's probably more going to be somewhere like Instagram, but it is entirely possible, right? It just works in a slightly different way. But the best way of doing it is by going out there and playing the songs and pressing the flesh, right? That's the only way that actually really works. It's the only way that your career becomes anywhere even close to being sustainable. And we know that for a fact. We've seen it, and it's something that more acts, if they want to, should strive to do. But the old school way of doing it, going out and playing loads and loads of shows, that's not sustainable anymore really for bands. Like, this is a challenge to you right now. Off the top of your head, do you know of any smaller bands that are actually playing for any more than 3 days in a row over a weekend?
I know one band, a band called Helicon from Glasgow, who still get their shit in a van and go, and I have the utmost respect for them. I know one band down south, probably Sly and the Family Drone, who still get their shit in a van and really go. But I think also those are slightly older guys.
Totally, yeah.
More old ages with us. And they're guys who still see that as being the way you do it, and they enjoy the experience. And even though that might actually not be that financially rewarding, certainly the Family Drone guys, I know just through my interactions with them, that it's a way of life for them. It's what brings them pleasure. In the same way as I would go on tours for weeks at a time, and you'd be scraping by, you come back maybe a wee bit of money, but not much. But it's more about your own sort of personal reward for that.
Aye.
I know many new bands. Almost none. Yeah,
because nobody wants to play to 5 people on a Sunday night.
But I do want to give props to. I mean, you're saying, do I know it? Not from my local community. The band Slacker, who we spoke about,
they're on the road all the time.
All the time. Was it like nearly 200 shows a year?
Which is ruinous. That's financially ruinous.
It can be. I mean, I think it depends, you know. I'm assuming they bought their vehicle. That probably plays a big part in helping you start to get into profit. I think we actually had organised a show for them recently. Pop punk band, you know, depends on your thoughts in the genre, but lovely people. And I think did he have he'd had an emergency hernia operation, and he went and dug out his granddad's old wheelchair so that he could get on the road and get up and make the date from Southampton to fucking Glasgow. Now, I think he had a couple of other shows on the way, but the point is, I have bands cancelled because, you know,
I get sniffles.
I've broken a guitar string and I can't buy any spares. I mean, we get preposterous excuses. There is a total mindset difference here. There are bands out there doing it. Putan Club, who are going to play next week, again, a band from, I think, Italy and France they're from, and they'll tour the fucking wilds of Russia. To this day, they're still doing those tours, sometimes off the grid, if you know what I mean, to do it. There are
Hexus are another example of a band that have you seen Hexus?
I've not seen them.
Did you know of them and their crazy tours? I think like late last year they did like the entire South Asia.
Oh yeah, I do know who you mean, actually. Yeah, I've heard
the 3-piece kind of sludgy, doomy, power violency.
The reason I know this is
band for Denmark.
I think someone sent me one of their posters.
I think
and
it was me.
It was mental.
Yeah, absolutely insane.
Yeah.
It was like 30 dates. I mean, how are you getting from India to fucking Tokyo in like 3 days? Like, it's insane.
But I know that, for example, the Putan Club guys are involved with a group that bought a boat so that they could access remote Russian communities to do hardcore and goth shows and stuff. I mean, it's just like, there are people out there with that mindset. Wildhearts are of that generation, of that belief that you go out and you just fucking do it. I mean, they're not like, well, I was going to say, actually, they're not playing like local pubs. I believe that same tour where Wildhearts played in Stirling, they played in Gala Shields. And I mean, nobody, I've never played in fucking Gala Shields, you know, so they do seem willing to go and do those smaller shows, even if it's just road testing new material and that. But I take your point though. I mean, those are I'm struggling to come up with even the half dozen examples. There's not a lot of it.
Would you do it now in a new band in the UK?
Yes, I wouldn't. But you're asking me, I'm a fucking masochist. I'm not the person to ask. The thing is,
I'm a weekender now. I think I'm a weekender guy. People that I know who've done that, who we've played with, have said, don't do that anymore. Just do weekenders. But we've done that. and we did that like before the pandemic, and we've tried it after the pandemic.
This is why no one wants to be in a band with me.
And it's like,
what's a we don't do gigs on a Wednesday, Chris.
I get, but I see both sides of the argument, you know, because sometimes you can go and play Montrose on a Wednesday night and it's rammed, you know, because it's Montrose and it's a Wednesday night, you know, or sometimes you go to play Montrose on a Wednesday night and it's Montrose, it's a Wednesday night. What did you expect?
Yeah.
You know, so there's, I guess, pros and cons, and I don't know, maybe it sounds a little bit like I'm making excuses, but I think the economic reality of it, because there is no middle class anymore, makes it really difficult.
Now you're kind of cutting to the chase of it, and that's what I was going to say. So the reason that this has come about is because the finances have dwindled so acutely, because, you know, using the 13th note thing, we've spoken about this in the show before, sorry if I'm repeating myself for regular listeners, but the 13th notes gigs, it wasn't even really about your fee, because you would make 2-3 times your fee in what you sold. Doesn't happen anymore. You don't sell CDs anymore at all. You can sell...
That's changing.
Well, supposedly, but I still think it's not going to come back like cassettes came back. No, it's certainly not going to come back anything like vinyl came back. It just isn't as good a format as well, plus sustainability issues and stuff like that. It's just not going to happen. But you don't sell CDs. T-shirts, yeah, I suppose a bit, but that just isn't there anymore. The sheer numbers aren't there anymore because there's so much more entertainment in the home, Netflix and chill and all that kind of attitude. You've got financial downturns, you've got issues with city centres and poor infrastructure, you've got austerity, you've got so many mitigating factors. You've got the crisis facing small venues, which is also, on one hand, led to some small venues absolutely ripping the piss with their ticket prices for local shows. You've got big artists ripping the piss with ticket prices for their shows, which means that, you know, if you go to see a Hydro show now, maybe that's you for 1 or 2 months. You're like, oh no, I went to see, I don't know, fucking... who's a non-cancelled rapper at the Hydro. Fucking Kiss, £170 to go and see a cheap ticket for Kiss at the Hydro, and you're like, well, that's pretty much me. You know, I don't need to go into the economics of it, you know how it is, but all of these things are eating into the, you know, people can't then go out the next day or the next weekend or whatever. So the live scene is becoming very austere, and that means that really gigs are often a bit of a loss leader in terms of trying to build your brand and hope for that one big payday, a publishing thing, a breakthrough of some sort. Ginger and Wildhearts are not of that reality. They're of a reality where you go on the road, you've got your tunes in shape, you've got your band in shape, so to speak, in their case.
You've got a band that can play the songs.
You've got a band that can really play, and you put on a good show, and people are wowed, and they come back the next time, and then more come back, and then more come back, and you get press, and it seems intuitive, it's just gone. Unfortunately, it's largely just gone in that form. And maybe it'll self-correct, but I can't really imagine a scenario where it does at the moment. But it's nice that they're still going. I know they've had a lot of problems. I know that members have come and gone and been locked out and all that kind of stuff, but it's nice that it's still a brand that can self-sustain. I mean, they played, was it last week?
No, they're playing tomorrow, Thursday night, the 13th of March.
Oh, right, there you go. So where are they playing?
Garage.
The Garage. So
it's like a 700 capacity venue.
Yeah, it's a good sized venue. So I mean, it's nice that they can still do that. It's good to know that there is someone keeping that alive, but I'm not sure that there's an awful lot of bands coming up behind them with that sustainable middle class sort of thing. Maybe there is in a genre that we are not particularly au fait with.
There probably is. Some of the bands that I love, like for example Hot Water Music, like they're coming off the road, and either Chris Cresswell is just going back on the road with another band.
Yeah, but look at the age of them. That's the same generation.
No, like Chris is about the same age as us. Like he'll go on back on the road with the Flatliners right afterwards because he doesn't really want to go back to working in a bar. Fucking Chuck Reagan's got his own fly fishing like tour business, you know, because he has to get all these guys have got to go back home and work, and they'll sell out 500 cap venues all over Europe, all over the world. They make a good amount of money from doing that, but it's not enough to sustain a family.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
Wildhearts are a cut above that, I think, just a little bit, you know. Probably because of how fervent their fan base is. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but I am under the impression that they have a good following in Japan. I don't know how evenly spread their audience is, though. I don't know how they do in America, for example, because I've not had as many releases in America. They are a very British band to me, so I would expect them to sustain a certain level here that might not necessarily translate into other markets.
Yeah.
Look, we'll do a little bit of the discography, then we'll take a break and we'll come back next week for the rest of it. There's some quite funny stories mixed in with this stuff as well. And again, I'm probably going to defer to some of Ginger's own comments on that list that he did, where he went through all their own albums and sort of ranked them. Also, the discography, as we discuss it here, will not feature stuff like they did a series called Acoustic Albums Are Shit, Volume 1 to 4. We just don't have the time nor the energy to go into that level of granular detail. We're not doing the best ofs or the collections, things like that, okay? We will start, though, with, chronologically speaking, it's not really an album. Don't Be Happy, Just Worry was an EP. It followed their first EP, which is Mondo Akimbo A Go-Go, and it was combined with that. And yeah, I think it's an 8-track release that came out in 1992.
Everybody loves you and you're never second best. Smell of busy money and you follow it to death. I smell the shit upon your breath. I remember you when you were an evening.
This places 10th in Ginger's list of, I think it was 14 in total. So he'd not long since been fired by the Choir Boys. He said he was walking around LA and then later London with the idea for a song which became Turning American, just going round in his head.
Turning American, walking away from the crumbling empire, won't make it grow anymore. Changing your style 'cause the radio tells me.
In his words here, he decided to return to the Wildhearts project that he'd previously toyed with. Now, I don't know what that means, because this is like 1989 when he left the Choir Boys, and as I understand it, Wildhearts was formed in 1989, and I think CJ maintains that he formed Wildhearts with Ginger in 1989. I'm not sure if there's an implication here that I'm maybe misunderstanding, that Wildhearts existed before that. I'm unaware of that. Maybe somebody can correct us if that's the case. I don't think it did, though. Anyway, the two EPs came out in 92. They combined it into this longer collection. They recorded the second of the two, Don't Be Happy, Just Worry, in Seattle at Bad Animal Studio with Terry Date. So that's kind of like pretty fucking exciting.
Yeah.
A lot of very famous albums being recorded there. And Ginger said it was actually quite a good time as well, because he'd gotten his first publishing deal, so he actually had a wee bit of money for the first time, certainly in a long time. It's good, energetic. I mean, it's not really my bag, but it sounds fresh. Do you know what I mean? It sounds pretty raw.
Slides away and go for growth again. It's Spider-Mania. It's extra sense and thrills. It's Spider-Mania. It's zooming on the...
Kind of youthful, exuberant. It's a decent release. It's not something I would spend time with, but I can understand why he thinks fondly of it.
Yeah.
Albeit it's pretty far down his list because it's primitive and it's a kind of not really a proper album and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, an exciting time for them. Chronologically, their next release, their first album is Earth vs. the Wildhearts from 1993.
The papers hanging off the walls. These roaches dancing in the halls. You still pay your fortune to crawl down Misery Street.
Now, a lot of fans are just adamant that this is still their best release. Ginger puts it at number 4 on his own list, which I think he acknowledged was a wee bit controversial in the eyes of some. It was recorded in the same studio as Nevermind the Bollocks.
Nice.
Which I think is probably a feather in the cap there. It featured Mick Ronson, David Bowie's guitarist, and I think it also featured, I think it's Sarah from the Cardiacs. Sorry, I think I said a different name earlier on. He said that everybody else who's in the studio had recorded an album before apart from him. This was his first full album. The quote goes, "It was all demos, so it doesn't matter what I do because we were going to record it properly. Recording was a blur. Doing demos, getting really fucking drunk and not even taking it seriously." As we mentioned earlier on, CJ commented this as well and said they thought it was just demos, so they were just really relaxed about it, very unfussy, trying stupid shit out, having a bit of a laugh. Ginger says it was his own comments to an A&R guy that led to the demos getting released as the album. CJ was like, I don't know who decided that. Ginger says it was him. He also said that in the run-up to the album recording, they'd been really pretty careful not to release songs that they thought were their best material. So when they were doing the previous EPs, he was like, no, we really wanted to keep the strongest stuff. And he's still pretty comfortable that this album doesn't have any filler on it at all. He thinks it's pretty solid, and I think certainly a lot of fans do agree with him.
Do I have to take this shit from you every time I look your way or say, hey, it's about time? You show me yours and I'll show you mine.
thoughts on it?
I thought it was a good record, yeah. Highlights, I guess, TV Tan, kind of a breezy American video rock vibe. This is a good example of their immaculate backing vocals and choruses, which they do very well. I liked Miles Away Girl. Slight Social Distortion vibe, which is probably more of a Ramonesy kind of thing, but yeah. My Baby's a Head Fuck again. It's kind of got that Ramonesy feel to it. Yeah, it's and that's the one with Mick Ronson on it as well. I think earlier
plays a solo on it, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think earlier I said that Fuck was the one with Mick Ronson, but he was on this one for sure. Yeah, I think it was fine. Sucker Punch is kind of more heady. But no, I think it's a fine record.
Sucker Punch is a big song for them.
Yeah, it's probably amongst the strongest for sure. It does have a nice energy to it.
It sounds like an album. It sounds like a discrete set of recordings within a certain space and time. I'm honestly not a big fan of it. I think when I got so into Wildhearts from hearing Fishing for Luckies, I obviously, understandably, tried to work backwards. I just really couldn't click at all. Yeah. And this was raved about by the few people I knew who knew them. I was just like, I'm sorry guys, I just don't get it.
They're a bit late as well with this sound.
Yeah, a wee bit, and it's an attitude sound. It's got like an energy and a gruffness to it, but melodically I just didn't find it very rewarding, the choices that they went for. But I mean, hey, they're not worried. I probably wasn't the target audience for that. It did well. It continues to do well. It's held in really high regard by fans and actually just critically. It's a very notable British release from that era. 1993, I mean, there's some fucking big records coming out then as well, and this one was up there with them in the kind of end of year lists. It did well. But after years of supporting bands, this was the album that cemented them, and so they were very quickly headlining the same venues that they'd been opening at previously. Ginger has said, I was so fucked up at the time, I didn't even appreciate how much good fortune was coming our way.
Yeah.
Now, technically, 1994, the next release was Fishing for Luckies, the fan version, because that made it out before Fuck. But Fuck 1995 was actually meant to be a double album.
Yeah.
There is a deluxe double edition available now.
It's on Spotify.
That's extended the release.
It's an hour and 27 minutes long, so it's,
Right, but I think the original was meant to end with Sky Babies. The deluxe double version was released during COVID in that originally intended double format. I'm not exactly sure how, but it's something to do with Danny that actually facilitated getting the rights that made that possible, because the tracks that made Fishing for Luckies were tracks that had been recorded at the same time as the tracks on Fuck, but the record company kind of balked at the idea of releasing a double album. I do note though that was the era of some pretty successful double albums, not least of all Melancholy and Infinite Sadness, so it wasn't like there was no market for it, albeit I appreciate it was their second release. But those songs got cut from it and it came out as Fuck. Ginger feels that the original single disc version of Fuck, which he doesn't like very much, he thinks the label were trying to cobble together another iteration of the debut album. He actively dislikes that original one, albeit this one, the double disc version, he rated as number one in his estimation of their back catalogue, but specifically the double disc one, not the single disc one. The recurring counterfactual theme is that he, and I don't think it's just him, I think maybe CJ says something about this as well, they think that if they'd released the double edition to begin with, they may well have levelled up as a band henceforth. That the double disc thing, you can never know, but they feel like, oh, that would have been the thing. People would have been like, what? That's so ballsy, blah, blah, blah. That's obviously something they tell themselves. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think, yes, this is not the form that they wanted it to appear in, but it certainly did well. It certainly was pretty well received.
Yeah.
I'm glad we gotta share a little and it can. One of these days, in a classical way, I will just setting out fire with a flame of true light.
He also reckons that the sudden explosion of Oasis around about the time of this album's release was the death knell for their particular brand of rock. And I think there's a fair bit of truth in that, because Oasis and the bands that sounded like that really swallowed up the airwaves. It's not so much that people didn't want to hear this, but in terms of, you know, if you're a playlister for radio, you're using up a lot of the airtime for Britpop, and you're not giving this the number of rotations that it probably would have gotten had that not happened. So yeah, if that's a fairer point.
I think I only listened to the original version, and I think it's a very strong record. I like the fact that they like to cram a lot of melody into choruses. It's certainly something I try and do as well, but I guess we come at it from completely different angles. But their hooks never stick in my head.
That's the thing for me.
You know, apart from I want to go where the people go.
I was going to say that's the one that absolutely gets in there. I want to go where the people go. It's the only one for me that really, really jumps into my mind. Maybe
we're just tuned differently in terms of what we like from our music. But yeah, I mean, the other songs for me, I did like Nita Nitro. It's kind of easy breezy again. Caprice sort of hints at that kind of hard rock thing, which they would often do, bit riffy. I think one of the things that I also think about this record is it feels quite American too.
It does.
They flirt between being English and American from record to record.
As I've said though, I think the appearance of little kind of traits that I would associate with kind of punk, be it Pistols, Sham 69, that kind of thing, that does to me maintain that Britishness, mainly Englishness, to be honest.
Yeah, this is the second record. It's 1995 at this point, so they're trying to be the first record they're trying to be a rock band in the midst of grunge, and the second time round they've just fallen away again because of a different musical trend. It feels as though they never quite catch the break when they need to as a band.
Aye. Just a little bit behind the curves. And so this was obviously followed by another, on the back of it doing well, basically another issue of Fishing for Luckies, which was known as Fishing for More Luckies, which I think was the original Fishing for Luckies plus 3 more demo tracks, the release of which was actually blocked by the band. However, I think it was still printed, and so therefore people could still get hold of the copies of it from that print run. And then that brings us to my version of Fishing for Luckies, which was officially released in 1996. It's my preferred choice of all of those different versions, and it had some tracks in it that had been newly recorded specifically for it and saw other tracks drop off. We will go through that in a lot more detail, and that kind of brings us to a nice little segue there, because we'll come back in the next episode and we'll go through the rest of the back catalogue, get into a mixture of gross and hilarious anecdotes, and I'll kind of unpack why I'm being so picky about what version of their fucking, I think he called it a posh bootleg, set my world alight. But aye, Mark, a bit admin, if you liked the show, what
if you
do?
like the show, please go and follow us on our social media channels. Unsung Pod, that's the handle you need. We're on all of them, I think.
We're not on X, are we?
We're not on X, no. We're not on X, not anymore. But everywhere else you'll find us. TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, etc., so on and so forth. And if you really like this podcast and you don't like ads, then we've got something that you can do to stop that. And
I've got a better selling point in that. If you really like this, or if you quite like this podcast, but you'd like to give us a piece of your mind because we said something about Wildhearts, or we didn't say something about Wildhearts that you think has to be addressed, then subscribe at the lowest level. It's $4 a month. We have an episode out every week, plus bonus episodes, plus you get the massive back catalogue, and it gives you access to the AAA group, which means you can talk to us directly, including suggesting bands and records and things like that we have covered and do cover from time to time. So subscribe via Patreon, Mark.
It's patreon.com/, you guessed it, Unsung Pod.
Unsung Pod. There is a record club upsell on that where we actually curate and send out albums from bands and labels, all independent. We get a slice of that, the bands get a slice of that, and you get a record every single month. You can choose to do that or not do that. If you don't want to part with your cash, we really appreciate you sharing this. If you're a member, for example, of any Facebook groups, seem to be a really good way. If you're on let's say you're on a Wildhearts fan group, we would really appreciate you linking this on it. That would go down really well. That worked really well when we did Head Swim. In particular, it worked well with Low. It worked well with a whole bunch of stuff.
China Drum as well.
Yeah.
But I would just say that if you've made it this far and you're a fan of the band and you hate us and you've hate listened to the whole thing, and you post it in this group and say, these guys are fannies.
Get a load of these cunts.
Yeah.
Look,
We appreciate that as well, because your engagement is what matters the most to us, whether you like it or not.
check it out, guys. Just what the world needed, more Scottish voices talking about Wildhearts.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. So yep, come back next week and we'll get into more of the back catalogue, including some fucking mental stories, and we'll talk about fishing for Luckies in detail, including me trying to make a case to a potential Ginger listener about why he's wrong about his own record.
Yeah, it's going to go down very well.
See you then.